Today, we shall see about the sufferings of Jesus on the cross that He took up for us.
It is the most painful death ever invented by man, and is where we get our term excruciating. Make up your mind and listen to this with fervor. The purpose of this post is to make you grow in your love for the Lord by knowing what a horrible and terrible death the crucifixion was. Jesus refused the anesthetic wine which was offered to him by the Roman soldiers because of his promise in Matthew chapter 26 verse 29, where he says,
But I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. Pilate ordered Jesus to be flogged with whips.
The whip consisted of several strips of leather. The middle of the strips were metal balls that hit the skin, causing deep bruising. In addition, sheep bone was attached to the tips of each strip. When the bone makes contact with Jesus' skin, it digs into his muscles, tearing out chunks of flesh and exposing the bone beneath. Jesus lost a great volume of blood, which caused his blood pressure to fall and put him into shock.
Roman soldiers placed a crown of thorns on Jesus' head and a robe on his back.
The robe helps the blood clot to prevent Jesus from sustaining more blood loss. As they hit Jesus in the head, the thorns from the crown pushed into the skin and he began bleeding profusely. Pilate ordered Jesus to be flogged and lacerated, and finally brought Jesus in front of the people and said,
Behold the man.
He thought that the people would pity him on seeing the worst condition of Jesus and release him. But the people were intrigued and they shouted,
Crucify him.
Pilate had no other option than to sentence him to crucifixion.
The crucifixion of Jesus was a horrific, slow, painful death.
Jesus was half dead when the cross was placed on his shoulders. The cross weighed 136 kilograms. He had to carry the cross through the alley and into the streets and further climb on the mountain hill, a total distance of 2 miles.
Nailed to the cross, a pain that cannot be described.
Jesus was nailed to the cross with 6-inch nails on his wrist, and his feet was kept one over the other, and an 8-inch nail was fixed. Nailing was the culmination of the pain. It is a terrible agony to the point of dying. It is a pain that cannot be described in words. Jesus could not maintain his anatomical position on the cross, as his hands and legs were fixed with nails to the cross. He was forced to support himself on the single nail that impaled his feet to the cross. Jesus' knees were flexed at 45 degrees, and hence he had to bear his whole weight with the muscles of his thigh. Soon his thighs became tired, and now the weight of his body had to be transferred to his wrists, his arms, and his shoulders. Within a few minutes of his hanging on the cross, Jesus' shoulders were dislocated. Minutes later, Jesus' elbows and wrists also got dislocated. Due to these dislocations, his arms became 9 inches longer than normal. The prophecy which was mentioned in Psalm chapter 22, verse 14, was thus fulfilled.
I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint.
After Jesus' wrists, elbows, and shoulders were dislocated, the weight of his body was now held by the muscles of his chest wall. This made his rib cage to be pulled upwards and outwards. In order to breathe, Jesus was physiologically required to force his body. In order to breathe out, Jesus had to push down his feet in spite of the nails to raise his body and allow his rib cage to move downwards and inwards to exhale air from his lungs. Jesus could not easily push down his feet from the nails because the muscles of his legs, bent at 45 degrees, were extremely fatigued and cramped. The crucified victim has to physiologically move up and down the cross a distance of about 12 inches in order to breathe. And every move is so tormenting as the nails made the hole in the hands and feet bigger, the pain unbearable. The process of respiration caused agonizing pain, mixed with the absolute terror of asphyxiation. Within minutes of crucifixion, Jesus became severely dyspneic, could not breathe. His movements up and down the cross to breathe caused excruciating pain in his wrist, feet, and dislocated elbows and shoulders. The movements became less frequent as Jesus became increasingly exhausted, but the terror of imminent death by asphyxiation forced him to continue in his efforts to breathe. The pain from his two shattered median nerves in his wrists exploded with every movement.
Jesus was covered in blood and sweat.
The blood was due to the scourging that nearly killed him, and the sweat was due to his efforts to breathe out air from his lungs. Throughout all this, he was without clothes, and the Jewish leaders and the crowds were jeering, swearing, and laughing at him. Physiologically, Jesus' body was undergoing a series of catastrophic and tormenting sufferings. Jesus endured physical torment, emotional trauma, and spiritual agony. Because Jesus could not breathe, his blood oxygen level began to fall, and he developed hypoxia. Hence, his blood carbon dioxide level began to rise, a condition known as hypercapnia. This rising carbon dioxide level stimulated his heart to beat faster in order to increase the delivery of oxygen and to bring down the level of carbon dioxide. The respiratory center in Jesus' brain sent urgent messages to his lungs to breathe faster, and this made Jesus to punt. Jesus' physiological reflexes demanded that he took deeper breaths, and he involuntarily moved up and down the cross much faster despite the excruciating pain. However, due to the nailing of Jesus to the cross and his increasing exhaustion, he was unable to provide more oxygen to his oxygen-starved body. The twin forces of hypoxia and hypercapnia caused his heart to beat faster and faster, and Jesus developed tachycardia. Jesus' heart beat faster and faster, and his pulse rate was about 220 beats per minute, the maximum normally sustainable. Jesus had drunk nothing for 15 hours since 6 p.m. the previous evening. Jesus had endured a scourging which nearly killed him. He was bleeding from all over his body following the scourging, the crown of thorns, the nails in his wrists and feet, and the lacerations following his beatings and falls while carrying the cross. Jesus was already very dehydrated and his blood pressure fell alarmingly. His blood pressure was about 80/50. He was in first degree shock with hypovolemia, tachycardia, tachypnea, and hyperhidrosis. By about noon, Jesus' heart probably began to fail. Jesus was in heart failure and respiratory failure. Jesus said,
"I thirst."
because his body was crying out for fluids. Jesus was in desperate need of an intravenous fusion of blood and plasma to save his life. Jesus could not breathe properly and was slowly suffocating to death. At this stage, Jesus developed hemopericardium. Plasma and blood gathered in the space around his heart. A few minutes before he died, Jesus stopped bleeding. There was only water coming from his wounds. Because of the increasing physiological demands on Jesus' heart and the advanced state of hemopericardium, Jesus eventually sustained cardiac rupture. His heart literally burst. This was the cause of his death. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Jesus said,
"Tetelestai,"
meaning, it is finished. Jesus died after 6 hours of the most excruciating and terrifying torture ever invented.
Jesus died and gave his life for each one of us. Because of the unconditional love he has for us and for our redemption. Greater love has no one than this, that one should lay down his life for his friends. What are we going to do for him?